so people don't have to remember a password, which eliminates a lot of identity attacks, as I'm sure
but everybody loves passwords. I mean, we should just have more of those, shouldn't we?
Well, they were my bread and butter. Like when I was a little identity nerd, like that was a lot of what I learned was how to secure password-based systems and how often do you force people to rotate and what sorts of complexity do you require? All this stuff that I was an expert in. Like now I don't need it all because we've gone past that.
What do you see as the differentiator? Because there's a lot of players in this authentication space. I guess what makes, let me put my jaded CISO hat on. What makes Beyond Identity special or unique in this area?
Yeah, so we were founded only 5 years ago. So we're fairly new to the identity space, which helped us kind of leapfrog a lot of the legacy infrastructure. So we never had passwords in our system. There are no shared secrets anywhere in the Beyond Identity architecture. So we're fundamentally built on a foundation that is more secure. And then we have that integration with security tooling. So we were actually not founded by identity nerds. We were founded by security nerds who said, hey, we can solve this identity problem better. And so it's a really different way of approaching the identity problem than you'll see from most legacy vendors.
This is Identity at the Center. If it has anything to do with IAM, this is the go-to podcast. Now your hosts, Jim McDonald and Jeff Stedman.
Welcome to the Identity at the Center podcast. I'm Jeff, and that's Jim. Hey, Jim.
Hey, Jeff, how are you?
Oh, not so bad. Yourself?
I'm good. You can see my sweatshirt on. I'm beyond cold. Beyond cold here in February in the South.
I see what you did there. This is in reference to our sponsored episode we're doing today, right?
That's right.
Okay.
We're having a Beyond kind of day.
All right. Well, why don't we get to it? We do have a sponsored episode today. We've got Beyond Identity. They have been kind enough to come on the show, and we'll have Sarah Cicchetti on here in a minute. But just to make it clear, right, this is a sponsored episode. They have graciously donated to our nonprofit to help keep this thing running. And everything you hear today is going to be the truth as we see it from IDAC and Beyond Identity. But let me go ahead and introduce Beyond Identity. BeyondIdentity.com. Go there for more information. Actually, BeyondIdentity.com/IDAC. There'll be a special landing page for that. And then they've also got BeyondCon coming up in a couple of weeks by the time people hear this. On March 20th, that'll be in Palo Alto. So definitely go to the website and check that out. I'll have links in our show notes as well, but let's get to it. We've got Sarah Cicchetti. She's been with us before. She's the Director of Product Strategy at Beyond Identity. Sarah, welcome back to the show.
Hey, great to see you guys again.
It's been a while. I think I saw you in passing at Gartner's IAM conference at the end of 2024. You were with us for episodes 199 and 101, I believe. And now we're in the 300s. So we got to catch up a little bit. But I think the biggest change is you've moved to a new organization. Why don't you tell us a little bit about Beyond Identity? And then you got to tell me, what does a Director of Product Strategy mean? What does that mean to people in the real world?
It's a completely meaningless title. So I was at AWS for 5 years. So that was where I was the last 2 times I was on the show. And being at AWS, I got the chance to talk to dozens of identity startups, hundreds of identity teams all over the world. And I was really floored by the technology that Beyond Identity had and wanted to come over. And little did I know that at the exact same time, my colleague Dean Sachs, also from AWS, was talking to Beyond Identity. So we both ended up moving over at the same time. And basically what they needed me to do was do some product discovery and innovation, as well as facilitate Dean and Monty Weissman to do all of our standards work. So we participate in the OpenID Foundation, the Internet Engineering Task Force, the FIDO Alliance. All that work is done by my team. And so we figure out where we want to influence standards and how we want to move forward there. So we're a team of innovators, standards nerds, and developers who are helping us bring new products to market.
So what does Beyond Identity do? Plays in the authentication space, and to what degree, and other things?
We do. So it's an SSO, or it can be only an MFA. So it's got kind of 2 different modes. And it sort of sits in the middle where it straddles both human and non-human identity. So the way that we do SSO is not typical. So typically you would have multi-factor authentication. You'd have a password and some sort of device where you are verifying that it's actually you. The way that Beyond Identity does it is we put an endpoint directly on the device itself so that we can look at the security posture of the device. And then we also integrate signals from all of your security tooling. So we can get signals from Jamf, from Zscaler, from Intune, and use those as part of your authentication policy to determine whether people get in or not. And we can do it continuously as people are working to say, hey, is this person still have the security posture that they did when they logged in? So it's a cool marriage of security and identity and data that all comes together with authorization and authentication, and it's all in one very easy to use product. So that's the non-human part, and then the human part is just the local biometric on the machine. And that's how we do it, so people don't have to remember a password, which eliminates a lot of identity attacks, as I'm sure
but everybody loves passwords. I mean, we should just have more of those, shouldn't we?
Well, they were my bread and butter. Like when I was a little identity nerd, like that was a lot of what I learned was how to secure password-based systems and how often do you force people to rotate and what sorts of complexity do you require? All this stuff that I was an expert in. Like now I don't need it all because we've gone past that.
What do you see as the differentiator? Because there's a lot of players in this authentication space. I guess what makes, let me put my jaded CISO hat on. What makes Beyond Identity special or unique in this area?
Yeah, so we were founded only 5 years ago. So we're fairly new to the identity space, which helped us kind of leapfrog a lot of the legacy infrastructure. So we never had passwords in our system. There are no shared secrets anywhere in the Beyond Identity architecture. So we're fundamentally built on a foundation that is more secure. And then we have that integration with security tooling. So we were actually not founded by identity nerds. We were founded by security nerds who said, hey, we can solve this identity problem better. And so it's a really different way of approaching the identity problem than you'll see from most legacy vendors.
So let's talk about the name Beyond Identity. Is there any significance to it? Is it just it's a cool name, first of all? The domain name was available. Tell me about the history there.
So as I understand it, I was not at the company at the time, but the Google Beyond Corp white paper had just come out. There was a company called Beyond Trust and a company called Beyond ID. And so we decided we wanted to add more confusion to the identity marketplace. And so we decided to call ourselves Beyond Identity. And that's kind of how it went.
I love it. It's simple. And plus, it's there's all the vowels are there in the name. So you can actually spell out beyondidentity.com/IDAC. Go there, visit that for more information. So it makes it easy for that. I want to turn over to Jim here in a second, because I know we want to get into more details kind of around how this works. But one of the questions that I get asked a lot to ask vendors when they come on is, tell me how your customers measure success. In this case, authentication, I'm assuming it's things like MFA availability or risk reduction, but how do Beyond Identity customers measure success with your product?
Yeah, so a lot of it has to do with risk mitigation. So when they go to their board, their C-suite, their cybersecurity insurers, they can say with a completely straight face that they have eliminated entire categories of attack vectors, and that they can guarantee that because that infrastructure simply doesn't exist in their identity solution. So that's a huge win. And then on the usability side, we actually have the customers of our customers, so employees of people who use Beyond Identity, raving about the user experience. They don't have to remember passwords. They don't have to get out their phone. They can just use the biometric that's right on their laptop or right on their device. And we were as you said, we were down in Dallas for Gartner. We presented with Inspire brands. So Inspire is Buffalo Wild Wings and Dunkin' Donuts. So a whole bunch of restaurants. And they don't have a whole lot of attackers trying to get into Dunkin' Donuts, but they do need their employees to get in quickly and easily. And so after they implemented Beyond Identity, they actually had employees coming to them. And they're a Texas-based company. And so the employees said, yeehaw, hallelujah, because they loved the solution so much. They loved how easy it was to log in.
Well, and I love the donuts. So let's not forget about that. But I think this whole line of what you're talking about there it's kind of the balance between security and user experience. It's kind of the classic conundrum that we learned in our first days in information security. As you ramp up the security of a system or a process, the usability, there's more hurdles, it's harder to use. How how do you balance that? How do you make sure that you're not going too far in one direction, or, is that just kind of core built into the platform?
So it's different for every customer, right? So some customers have a really high amount of risk tolerance, and they are willing to make the system a little bit more open to more flexible in order to get that usability and that quick response. And we have other customers who are very security conscious, who really want to lock down the system and say, no, we only want these type of biometrics. We only want to get signals from these security vendors. And we want to make sure that every single authentication respects all these things. We want to know these things about the machine that the person is logging in on. And so it really varies. We have a wide variety of customers ranging from high usability to very high security use cases.
I like that a lot. So there is that ability for the customer to kind of like move those levers back and forth. From what I understand, you and I rubbed elbows at the FIDO Authenticate conference last year. I think you guys are pretty heavy into the use of passkeys. Is that kind of part of what's baked in? And, what's different about your solution in passkeys?
Yeah, so we use cryptography that is based on the machine. So if you want to call that a passkey, you absolutely can. Lots of people do. You could also call that a form of a certificate. You could call that a verifiable credential. Like, there's a whole bunch of ways to describe what we do, but essentially we put down a key pair on the machine, and that key pair is locked into the secure enclave of that machine. So unlike, say, a Google or an Apple passkey, it is not syncable across multiple machines. You can have multiple machines registered to one person, and you can change your settings so that that person can add machines to their account. But there is no way to take the key, the cryptographic key pair that's on the machine itself, and move it somewhere else. So that's a key security property that is a big difference between the way that FIDO credentials work today and the way that Beyond Identity credentials work. Okay,
so similar but different.
Similar but different.
With 3 different names.
And we are FIDO Member Alliance. We are part of the technical committee there, and we would love it if FIDO would adopt the way that we do things and standardize it. We are not trying to make this a proprietary protocol. We absolutely embrace standards, and we want to see this level of security within FIDO. So we are pushing for that.
So that idea of the key pair sitting on the device and not being able to sync those to other devices is really what I'm hearing is kind of like the differentiator here, and where you'd like to see this go. Is that fair? Did I describe that accurately?
Absolutely. So the problem with synced passkeys is that the user can share them, and there's no evidence that they've been shared. There's no evidence that that wasn't the original user who had that passkey. There's no chain of custody for where that passkey came from, or where it originated, or how it originated. And we would love for those things to exist within the FIDO standards. They don't exist today. But for right now, we have to do it in a proprietary way. And that's also outside the browser. So that has usability aspects to it as well, where if Google or Apple wants to change something about the way that the interface works with users for how they store their passkeys, how they originate passkeys, that obviously if you're using those passkeys for your enterprise, that'll change your whole user experience out from under you, where you don't have a chance to have a say. And so because we're using a proprietary mechanism for this, we can make that user experience really consistent and secure.
Yeah. So with Beyond Identity, does it matter if you're coming in on a corporate controlled device or a bring your own device? It
does. But we have a lot of customers who use us specifically for bring your own device. So if it is a corporate controlled device, if it has an MDM on it, we can query that MDM in real time, and we can say, not real time. We'll be able to query it in real time once everyone adopts shared signals, which everyone should do. But we query it every 15 minutes. So we will talk to your MDM and we will say, look, what's the security posture supposed to be? Is it there? What are the policy settings for this company? And then if it's a bring your own device, obviously we can look at different things on the device, but it won't have an MDM that we can query.
Typically, though, if you're doing BYOD for like a personal device into a work environment, they're probably putting some policies or something on your device. It's pretty rare that I see these days a unmanaged personal device with access to company resources. But I don't know. Is that an accurate assessment, Sarah, of kind of my view of it, or do you see kind of the Wild West still out there for when it comes to managing personal devices on a corporate network?
Well, when you say bring your own, like you think of someone's like, oh, I've got my personal cell phone, right? That is a use case we see where we can say, we want to make sure that that phone is not jailbroken. We want to make sure that its OS is up to date. So we can see certain security aspects of that phone that people bring themselves. But often BYOD is just contractors, right? So it is a managed device. It's just not managed by your company. And so there are different things we can query in that case, but we can make sure that there is a security bar that's met by all devices that access the systems in your company.
I want to get back to something you mentioned earlier, because you mentioned two of my favorite food groups of wings and donuts, the other being chocolate and nachos. So don't come at me. That's the real food square.
Don't judge.
Yeah, that's right. Do you have...
You told me it was potatoes. I thought it was potatoes. Come on.
There are, I'm sure, a lot of good stories, but do you have any kind of standout stories of how your customers are using Beyond Identity today that might be either unique or, hey, that was really cool, or just like the yeehaw moment, as you kind of put before earlier?
Yeah. So just as an aside, because you mentioned hot wings, both our CEO and our principal security engineer, Dean Sachs, are big hot wings fans. And so we did like a little hot wings imitation episode while we were at Gartner that's going to be coming out on our social media soon, where I kind of quizzed them about different standards things and made them eat increasingly hot sauces as we went. So that'll be fun to watch. But your question was about use cases. One of the primary use cases we see is people who have multiple IDPs. So either because of acquisition or because different departments in the company were allowed to do identity in different ways. Identity islands have formed, and that's true of almost every company. There's a great quote from Brian Poole, who used to do identity at Microsoft, that says there are two kinds of identity administrators. There's the kinds that administer more than one systems and the kinds that do not yet know that they administer more than one system, right? And so one of the benefits of using Beyond Identity just as an MFA level is to say, I've got 2 different IDPs here, or I've got 3 or 5 different IDPs here. I want one consistent security bar across them so that I, as a CISO, know that there is a consistent level of security across my company without having to dive into the config of each IDP and make sure that things are identical. So that's one use case we see. And then the other use case is just straight up SSO. It's a really great user experience as a single sign-on. And obviously, because we're newer, because we have that more secure code base, we are in a much better place than companies who have been building up their code base for 10 or 20 years, and it's getting a little rusty and a little creaky, and who knows what's going to happen.
We didn't mean code.
That's right.
Well, you mentioned too having that user experience, right? The consistency of the MFA experience is pretty important, because that's one of the areas that we see users tend to struggle with the most. Of, okay, now we've got a new MFA. If we have the similar experience across all of our different authentication services, that goes a long way, not only for just the use of it, but also the support, right? It's everybody's using the same thing. Documentation can be streamlined to focus on one thing instead of having like 8 different ways to do it. I got to imagine that plays into the calculus as well, right?
Absolutely. And you can modify the SSO so that different applications have different policies. So you can say, look, if you're paying for lunch in the cafeteria, if you're registering your car in the garage, like that requires almost no policy whatsoever. Like anybody in the company can go do that. But if you are touching the HR system, if you are touching the production database, right, then we've got a whole boatload of policies that you have to satisfy from all sorts of different places where we're getting security signals.
So I have a follow-up question, Sarah, with regard to the devices. So let's say I'm using an iPhone. That's one of the devices that has the Beyond Identity secure enclave. So it's keeping my authentication, my biometric data there locally. Is it leveraging the capability within the iPhone platform or whatever device I'm using to, in other words, is it using Face ID from my iPhone? Is it kind of operating the same way, or is it a second interface for doing that face match?
Yeah. So to be clear, it doesn't use your Apple account at all, but it does use the biometrics that are registered to the phone, as well as the secure enclave, the TPM in the phone. So Monty Weissman, who's the father of the TPM, is on my team, on our staff, to help us understand how we interface securely with the TPM for each device. And then on our board is Tahir El Gamal, who will be speaking at BeyondCon on March 20th coming up. And he's the father of SSL. And so we have a lot of people who are well-versed in crypto, and those APIs to get into the secure enclave of the iPhone actually didn't exist before this company was founded. So like when Okta was founded, when Ping was founded, this was not a way that people could do identity. It just, the technology wasn't there yet. And so it's because we were founded later that we are able to utilize these technologies and say, yes, we can lock those key pairs into the secure enclave of the phone. And that's a much more secure way to do it. And it's completely localized along with the biometrics.
So let me put a scenario out there. So one of the things that always happens with my phone is that if it doesn't recognize my face, it'll say enter your PIN. And so that I'm entering a 6-digit numeric value, which, is knowledge-based authentication, essentially. So does the Beyond Identity platform have the ability to say, well, it has to be the biometric, or is it going to fail back to the PIN, or is that kind of a configuration that your client gets to make?
Yeah, that can be configured by application, actually. So you can say, look, for the parking application, they can fall back to a PIN. We don't care. If they're trying to get into the HR database, they have to have a biometric, and they have to have a biometric that was registered since the time, like before the time that the app was installed, right? So if somebody gets their phone and registers a new biometric because it's unlocked or something, that biometric won't work for that application. So there's a wide variety of policy that you can put into the engine to do cool authentication and authorization stuff.
That's awesome.
That's a neat trick of screening, no pun intended, I guess, biometrics that were created after a certain point. You can distinguish timestamp of the biometric itself. Did I hear that right?
Of the creation of the biometric, yeah.
Okay, interesting. Okay. You mentioned shared signals earlier, and I know we did an episode recently with my friend Sean from Disney about this idea of continuous identity and kind of threat detection, et cetera. You mentioned shared signals. CAPE is part of that, continuous access evaluation profile. I struggle to get that one right sometimes. Where is Beyond ID fitting in with SSF and CAPE and sort of this idea of, being able to communicate with other technologies in the security apparatus or the organizational apparatus?
Yeah, we're huge investors in SSF and CAPE, so we'll be part of the Gartner Interop in London in March. And basically, we were doing this before it was cool, right? So we have always exchanged events with security vendors. So you have the ability in your Beyond Identity settings to say, hey, if something changes on the machine, go tell this vendor, the security vendor that I'm already invested in, that's happening. And you can go the other way as well and say, hey, if there's something happening in Zscaler, I want to know about it and I want to block authentications based on that, or I want to suspend users based on that. And so we have kind of always done this, but we have proprietary tool. Like we built that all ourselves. That was all a build out between us and Zscaler. It's all proprietary. And it only polls every 15 minutes. And so we love this idea of, hey, we can actually make this a standard. We don't have to make it proprietary. You can hook up any security vendor you want just like that. And it can be in real time because you have that CAPE highway transferring stuff back and forth. So we think that that's really valuable. We're investing in it. And we're really excited to see some relying parties get on board. So we would love to be able to, because we sit in the middle, right? Because we're an SSO and an endpoint, like we have stuff to tell people. We are a transmitter, but we also want to hear stuff from people. We are also a receiver because we're the SSO. And so we would love to see like a GitHub or an AWS or something like that get on board with shared signals so that we can tell them, hey, something about the posture of this device changed. And we don't know what your customer's policy is, but we can tell you what changed so that your customer can write policy around that in the RP itself.
I think a lot of people are still figuring out how to make this work. What does this mean in the real world when we start talking about shared signals and communication between apps? You mentioned a couple of examples there, but for people who just haven't kind of gotten their heads around, can you walk me through just a very basic scenario and kind of maybe hopefully make this real for people to help them understand kind of the art of the possible? Because I think we're still heading that direction and we're not quite there yet.
Yeah, sure. So we might see a CrowdStrike score that suddenly drops. And so we know that there's something about that machine that may have been compromised. And so we get that message from CrowdStrike saying, hey, this machine just went from a 99 to a 50. And you can write policy within Beyond Identity that says, hey, if this score drops below 60, they can park, they can buy things in the cafeteria, but they can't get to the HR systems. They can't get to the databases. Or like, we don't want to see them at all. We want to suspend them and have someone from our SOC actually look at what's going on with that machine before we reinstate this account. Right. So those are the kinds of use cases that shared signals enables between security vendors and IDPs. And then between IDPs and relying parties, we would love to see something like, so GitHub today has like sudo actions of like, hey, I want to delete this production repo, or I want to add an admin to this production repo. And they can do step-up authentication for those things. But that's a very coarse tool, right? So you as a customer can say is, yes, I want to step up when this happens. But there's no more fine-grained policy you can write around that. Whereas if we had shared signals in place, we could send all sorts of signals about what's happening with that machine, what's happening with that account, what's happening with that user. Maybe they just recovered their account in a way that's a little bit sketchy. And GitHub might want to do something with that is more interesting than just re-authenticating.
Before Jeff asked that follow-up, I wanted to make the comment that, one of the things that, you've brought it up a few times where you're kind of wanting these things to be open standards. You're supporting the open standards. So I just wanted to say good on you for that. But then I also, as you're just kind of describing how you could use shared signals to secure the Beyond Identity product, I started thinking, okay, well, how do I know that a drop of 10 points in the CrowdStrike is where I should, drop people from being able to access the HR system? So the way I formulated the question was this: do you have some way that like people run this in kind of learning mode for a while, like that they start to pick these things up to say, okay, that is the bending point, and then here's the breaking point where we start to block all access, for example?
Absolutely. So people often think of us as an authentication company, but we're also an authorization company. And one of the things you have to do when you are an authorization vendor and you have a lot of policy and a fine-grained policy engine like we do is you have to have an audit mode, right? So you have to let customers write policy, but not enact it. And just say, okay, what's going to happen to my infrastructure if I do this? And also do policy simulation of, hey, I've got a fleet of 3,000 machines. If I wrote this policy, how many of them would get locked out, right? And so doing auditing on your real data as well as simulation on things we know about your fleet will help you understand what impact those policies have and are going to have.
Yeah. So I think you're talking about these identity-based threats, and I'm kind of wondering, like, where are they originating from? Where are the majority of them originating from? Are they these things, like you said, like the CrowdStrike scores are dropping, or is it that you're getting, you're finding jailbroken devices, or is it even something more simple than that?
Well, a majority of identity-based threats today are password-based, right? They're phishing, they are password compromised, and so we eliminate those altogether. So most people who adopt Beyond Identity see a huge drop in their risk level, in their chance of breach to begin with.
That's because you just don't have passwords.
We just don't have passwords. That's not even a setting that's allowed.
Right.
And so
can't steal what's not there, right?
Exactly.
You're going to put us all out of business, Sarah. I'm sick of this. Cut.
Yeah, so we're moving on to more sophisticated attacks. Like, hey, I've jailbroken the phone. I've stolen the laptop. I've somehow compromised the operating system. I've gotten that user to install malware. Those kinds of identity-based attacks, or I've compromised the browser itself. those kinds of attacks we have to detect now that we've gotten rid of all the password-based attacks. Those are the more sophisticated ones that we're going after.
Yeah, and I've run into this question before of, is passwordless more secure than MFA? Because in MFA, you've got, possession-based probably. It might even be, biometric, but you also have a password. So does the password add any value? Is it important to get as many factors as possible? Does that make this process more secure?
Oh gosh, I could write you a novel. You've been to Authenticate conference. I'm sure you've seen Dean and Pam's great talk. If you haven't seen it, it's online about different factors, and that really thinking about things as multi-factor isn't serving us very well anymore. And we should be thinking about what kinds of threats we want to protect against and how well the different ways that we authenticate protect against them. And so even if you're using a password, there's a chance that your user is using a password manager, right? And so then it's not a something you know, then it's a something you have. And so using passwords we know it's bad for usability. We know it's good for attackers who can compromise those passwords. And if you're not using a password manager, you're likely to reuse passwords, which means that they're going to get breached. And then all of the places that you use that password are then compromised, right? And so passwords are not a great solution, which is why we're moving more toward device and biometric.
So where are we at as an industry? Are we at the point where, the attacks happen and then we react to them? Is there a way that we can get smarter about it and kind of like get ahead of the attacks? Is that what this is all about? Is that what Beyond Identity is essentially trying to do, is to be that intelligent platform so that you're not having to constantly react to what just happened?
It is. That's one of the things that I loved about your show with Sean Odell was that he talks about identity and security. It's one field. It's all one thing. And right now, the way that our vendors work is that you have security vendors and you have identity vendors, and they don't really talk to each other, right? And so you have the detection and the response on one side, and then you have the authentication on the other side. And that's not the way it should be, right? You should be able to detect and prevent, right? So as soon as you get the detection, you should be able to ban that authentication and make sure that the attack never happens in the first place, instead of trying to respond and mitigate afterwards.
I think getting smarter as an industry is always helpful. If we have smart tools, we got smart people, we have the data. It seems to me like this has been something that's been a long time coming to actually take advantage of the capabilities and the standards development that have enabled this. What do you see as sort of like the thing that has been really the enabler to get where you're at today from a product standpoint, to say, okay, yeah, we are actually at a spot where what password? There isn't a password to take, because I see a lot of passwordless and then password -less, where there's still a password floating around somewhere. What do you think has been the key to shift that way?
I don't think we are fully shifted yet, right? We had to do this all proprietary. All of our connections with security vendors are proprietary. The way that we do key pairs is proprietary, right? And we don't want it to be that way, right? We want this to be the standard for the industry. We want this to be the way that FIDO does things. We want this to be the way that Shared Signals does things. And so I think we still have a long way to go in the identity industry to figure these things out. But it was absolutely in terms of what made it even possible to do the proprietary part, it was absolutely phones now have a secure enclave that apps can access. That's a huge part of it. Security vendors now have very robust APIs that we can just go call and see if anything is going on. So a lot of that has been built out in the last 5 years, and that's what enabled this to exist the way it does today. But there's so much more work to do to get it industry-wide.
Sarah, what does the typical deployment of Beyond Identity look like in an organization, and what are some of the change management or adoption issues that you talk to the practitioners about, get out ahead of this? Is there a resistance from a user base of I don't want to use my biometrics for this thing because it's going to get put out on some server, which we know from this conversation that's not a realistic thing. But what are some of the main challenges you see?
Yeah, identity is extremely sticky, right? Doing a full IDP tear out and reboot is every CISO's worst nightmare. And so the way that we see people deploying Beyond Identity is either as an MFA layer on top of their IDP, and then they'll pick certain applications that they think are their crown jewels to say, okay, we're actually going to switch to full IDP mode here for this application, or for a pool of users. So we say, okay, we're actually going to switch out the IDP for our executive team, for our HR team, for our finance team, the teams where we're really worried about breach. And so they're not doing that full rip and replace that's really painful and expensive and time consuming, but they're kind of dipping a toe in, and then they're saying, okay, this is going well. Let's expand this to another application, another team, and slowly over time, kind of moving it throughout the company. And we have seen some resistance to biometrics. There are a lot of biometrics laws all around the world. And obviously, you can turn that off in the product if you feel like it's not what you want in your company. But the biometrics are local, so there is no central thing to compromise with the biometrics. It is all stored on the phone or on the laptop.
Is there a scenario where you could potentially selectively turn off the biometric for certain people and not other people? Sorry if I'm hitting you with a trick question here, but I'm wondering, like, okay, if you had kind of a workers union, I can't even remember the right term, in France, and those folks, for some reason or another, you just have to exclude them from using that biometric. Is that possible?
Absolutely. So that's just role-based access control, right? So that's you make a role that says, hey, this is the crazy France union of people who hate fingerprints. And you make a policy that says, like, these people can get in without a fingerprint.
Love the flexibility of the approach here, because I think you're right, where IDP surgery is a major surgery. And there's a lot of legacy players out there. So the ability to add this capability to an existing IDP, I think, is a huge win, for everybody. It's the ability to be more granular with the approach for MFA, which is important. It's the flexibility and the models and, just the different ways to approach it. I think it's a really smart way to approach it. So I tip my cap to you. So
exactly. Yeah. I fell in love with the technology, which is why I moved to the company. And obviously the people who I work with at the company are all fantastic. So it's a really great team. If you get a chance to meet us at a conference, please say hello, stop by the booth. We're very friendly. And my team specifically will all be at the Internet Identity Workshop coming up in April. So we are excited to talk to you about anything innovative. If you have something that you say, like, God, I wish IDPs did this, or God, I wish I had an endpoint that did that, come flag us down and tell us that you want us to build new things, because that's what we do.
I would say, be careful what you ask for. I want my IDP to have a cup holder. Might not be realistic, but maybe it is.
We can make it happen.
Right. So before that, though, you've got BeyondCon, and I guess I'm not familiar with BeyondCon. Tell me about this, because this is coming up March 20th. It's in Palo Alto, California. I assume you and your team will be there as well. But what is BeyondCon for people who aren't familiar with it?
Yeah. So we first started BeyondCon last year. We did it at our offices in New York. And basically, it's a combination of a Broadway show and a whole bunch of identity nerds, some security nerds. We had a fantastic time. So BeyondCon is going to be, so we're doing one on the West Coast now in the spring, in 2 weeks on March 20th. And I will be there. Our CEO will be there. We will have live demos, people on keyboards at stations who will be showing you things, who you can ask questions. You can touch the keyboard yourself. You can play with the console. None of this is just for show. We want to make sure that the technology is ready for you and that you can come and play with it if you want to. So having that chance to both see some great speakers. So we're going to have Tahir El-Gamal, who I mentioned, who was the CTO of security for Salesforce for a long time, and then switched over to VC. And he was one of our founders who founded and funded us as a VC. He will be speaking, and Sam Curry from Zscaler will be speaking about Zero Trust and how we kind of implement that given today's technologies and capabilities. And then a whole bunch of people from Beyond Identity obviously will be there talking about the product and doing demos. And then at the end of the day, we'll open up the bar, and we've got Broadway singers coming, because we're a New York company and we love singing. We actually do karaoke whenever we get together at a company all hands. So
Okay, you kind of prefaced my next question here because I was scrolling through the agenda and I see a private experience of Broadway jukebox hits, and I see things from like Jersey Boys, Frankie Valli, Four Seasons, etc. Tell me, I'm interested in this because I don't think I've seen this at a conference, before. What should people expect if they see this?
Yeah, so when we were in New York, we had people from the original cast of Hamilton who came and sang songs from Hamilton. And it was incredible. It was very moving and exciting and just allowed kind of the group to bond and have a great experience. And this will be the same thing. It'll be very intimate. It will be Broadway singers, and you will have a great time. So,
and you piqued my interest with the karaoke. What's your karaoke song?
So my favorite karaoke song is "Let It Go" from Frozen, but instead of singing "Let It Go," I say "Fuck It All." It's very cathartic. Okay. Highly recommend it.
All right. We earned the XL R-rated on that one, but we'll go for it.
Yeah, you can bleep me if you...
Right. No, I'm going to leave it in. Hey, we're all adults here. So
I certainly hope there are no children who are so interested in identity that they're listening to Identity.
Under 12, if you're listening to this, oh my gosh, I feel
Go
for
outside, touch grass.
You've shared a lot of information with us here, so I hope people will go check it out, beyondidentity.com/IDAC. I mentioned early on, it's been a while since you've been with us on the show. And in that time, I remember seeing a LinkedIn post, this is probably a couple of years ago at this point now, where you were heading off to Europe for a backpacking trip or something. Do I remember that correctly?
Yeah, that was in April. So just about a year ago. I went with my sister-in-law and we did the Camino de Santiago, which is walking across Spain. So it's a 600-mile trail. We just did the last 200 miles. But it was absolutely incredible. I'd highly recommend it. You take your little backpack of all your stuff with you and you stay in a different place every night. And for this one, you actually, you are making a pilgrimage to a cathedral. And so you get to the end and there's this huge plaza and all of these people who have walked hundreds of miles and they are crying and they're singing and they're screaming. And it is an incredible energy in that town just to be there with all of these people who have accomplished what might be the most difficult thing in their lives. It was an incredible experience. I highly recommend it.
So what was the impetus to do this? Was it just something you saw? Are you naturally a hiker or explorer, adventurous like that?
I really like wine. And so and I like my fitness kind of low impact. So there are restaurants and there are bars all along the trail and there are hotels, right? So you get the benefit of hiking, but unlike hiking in America where like you bring a tent and you don't shower, like you hike and then you have dinner and a bottle of wine and you sleep in a bed and you take a shower. And then you go walk the next day. And so this is like a vastly better experience than hiking in America.
Okay, you totally sold me with everything you just said. Like definitely sounds like my kind of hiking. It's
wonderful. What
was the best meal or bottle of wine or just wine that you had on this trip?
Oh, the Riojas all throughout Spain were incredible. I managed to get some of them back to America, not enough, so I'll have to go back at some point and get more. But actually, by the end, we were so tired of Spanish food. Like, we had one Chinese restaurant. We were like, "Oh my God, thank God!" I got to the point where I didn't want any more ham, and I love ham. So, like, that was a lot.
It sounds like a lot of fun. Jim, would you do a 200-mile trek to do that? I mean, you work out all the time.
For Chinese food?
For Chinese food in Spain?
Yeah. So I've done a fair amount of backpacking in the U.S. and gone through the no shower thing. I actually remember one time backpacking in New Hampshire and going into a river to take a bath because it had been a couple of days and the water was like just a degree or so away from freezing. It was not fun, but it was good to be clean. But yeah, I've backpacked all over, but I've never backpacked in Europe. I think it would be a great experience, but I'm kind of more into the next level of luxury now, which, would be a nice hotel bed and maybe even like 4 and 5 star hotels and stuff like that. So I probably won't do it. I can't say it's on my bucket list, but I've always thought it's like kind of a romantic concept to backpack through Europe right after finishing college or right after finishing high school. So sounds dangerous, but I think backpacking anywhere for long periods of time can be dangerous.
Well, way to bring it down.
People.
Thanks, Jim.
There are a lot of crazy people out there. What about you, Jeff? And you
I'm not a backpacker.
Right?
I'm not anything like that. But Sarah, you have sold me on this because I absolutely will walk from restaurant to winery. My wife is big into wine. She's been to Spain and Portugal and France and all those places, and part of her job in the past. So this sounds
tell me when you want to go. I'll do it again.
Okay. This sounds like right up my alley for sure.
Let's do it.
And, I think the hardest part about this is, at least in the US, it doesn't seem like there's areas where you can go 200 miles on foot and have all those amenities kind of there, right? You're going from village to village or town to town. Like, give me just like a normal day as you went through this.
Yeah, you go from town to town. The towns are about 5 miles spaced out. So we would go through 2 or 3 towns in a day. And it's great. Like, you stop for lunch and, you have whatever they have locally. So they might have a little bit of fried squid and some local beer, or they might have sandwiches with lots of ham, obviously. So whatever happens to be in that town, that's what you have that day. And then you keep walking and you meet all sorts of people from all over the world doing this. And people have told me there are similar trails in the UK and in Japan. So I might go explore what else there is across the world in this vein.
That sounds really exciting. I'm sold. This is something. I'm going to Berlin for EIC in a couple months. My wife and I are looking for something to do while we're out there. I think we're going to end up in Amsterdam. So I don't know. I'm sure we'll be doing plenty of walking and stuff like that, but maybe we can do something similar to that, or maybe just sit on a train and go through the countryside and whatever it may be.
Absolutely.
You've been very generous with your time. I want to make sure that we get you out of here on time, but any final thoughts or things that people should be listening that are watching should know about Beyond Identity that you want to get out?
I'm just really glad we could sponsor you guys. I really love the work that you're doing here with the podcast, the way that you're bringing the community together. I think it's awesome. I'm an avid listener, although it's weird to hear you guys at real speed because I normally listen to you at like 1.5. So like your voices are pitched. I'm like, oh, you're so masculine.
Well, not really.
But yeah, I really think that you guys are doing great work. And thank you so much for giving us the opportunity to support you.
Well, we appreciate that. Flattery gets you everywhere in this show, so I think that's a good spot. We'll have links in our show notes for people to check out. Again, website beyondidentity.com/IDAC. Bunch of information there. It'll be in our show notes, as well as links to BeyondCon, which is coming up. So hopefully people will go check that out. And then, Sarah, for yourself, we'll have your LinkedIn connection information in our show notes so people can reach out with questions, comments, or maybe stories from backpacking across Europe or whatever it may be. So with that, we'll go ahead and leave it for this week. Thanks, everyone, for watching and or listening, and we'll talk with you all in the next one.
You've been listening to Identity at the Center. We hope you've enjoyed the show. Make sure to like, rate, and review, and we'll be back soon. But in the meantime, hit the website at identityatthecenter.com. See you next time on Identity at the Center.